A very good afternoon, everyone. It is with great honor and pleasure I would like to welcome you all to this 24th Pediatric TB Eco Clinic in collaboration with the Regional Pediatric Center of Excellence for Tuberculosis. The Eco Clinic is a dynamic platform for case-based clinical discussions and dissemination of knowledge and bringing all experts together across the country for managing tuberculosis among children. On behalf of National Institute of Tuberculosis and Respiratory Diseases, I extend a heartfelt welcome to Dr. M. Singaravelu, President-elect IAP 2026, the directors and representatives from NIRT, NTI, state TB officers, directors of STDCs, esteemed faculty members from medical colleges, district TB officers, medical officers, pediatric TB specialists, and all healthcare professionals participating in today's session. Now, please let me introduce the faculty from NITRD. I am Dr. Dhulika Dhingra, Specialist Pediatrics NITRD, and I will be moderating today's session. And with me is Dr. Sangeeta Sharma, Chief in charge of National Center of Excellence for Pediatric TB and also former Director of NITRD. To my extreme left is Dr. Alok Yadav, CMO NFSG and pediatrician at NITRD. To formally start this important session, I now have the honor of inviting our respected and visionary director, Dr. Upasana Agarwal, ma'am, to deliver the inaugural address. Over to you, ma'am.
I think ma'am has not yet joined. She will join in some time, so I'll let you know, ma'am.
Okay, sure. Okay, may I now request Dr. Sangeeta Sharma, ma'am, to please address the gathering?
So we are back again on a monthly session every third Tuesday, 2 to 3 p.m. This session is going to be a very interesting session with Safdarjung as the presenting team. And without wasting time, now I'll request Dhulika to carry the session forward.
Thank you, ma'am. I would also now like to request Dr. M. Singaravelu to please speak a few words and introduce our clinic to the audience. Over to you, sir. Dr. M. Singaravelu.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Dr. Sangeeta Sharma, and the entire team involved in dissipating the knowledge about people, and especially it is a need of the hour for our postgraduates because tuberculosis is a hidden disease. People think that we have almost in the stage of elimination, but we are far ahead of it. So a lot of things has to be known, though we are very much improved in investigation part, but still diagnosis is still elusive. Coming to the management part, a lot of drug-resistant tuberculosis has to be known and various forms of presentation. Today, without wasting much time, I want to always admire to science. And surely, we will be taking this aspect to our IAP through our 50,000 members. Definitely, during my tenure next year as a president, definitely I will take up this important task of eliminating tuberculosis along with the visionary leader, our Sangeeta Sharma, and the entire team who is doing. And over to you, ma'am, for inviting me and giving me this
Dr.
opportunity.
Singavallu, I'm so indebted to you for your commitment. And you've been always there
Thank you.
as a president-elect, and we are hoping that our partnership will thrive, future
Definitely, madam.
heights.
Definitely.
And, this is, in fact, it's one platform where I feel the PGs and our medical students and all related to clinics, be it respiratory, be it other clinics would be benefited because tuberculosis comes as a differential diagnosis in almost everything. So
Sure.
now over to Dr. Dhulika.
Yes, ma'am. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you, ma'am. So without any further delay, we would like to start today's session. Today's presenting team is Department of Pediatrics, Vardhaman Mahavir Medical College and Associated Safdarjung Hospital, led by Dr. Pradeep Devada. The case expert is Dr. Pameli M. Nanda, and the case will be presented by Dr. Neha Yadav. Over to Dr. Neha and Dr. Pameli.
So, a very good afternoon, everyone. Am I audible, ma'am?
Yes, yes.
Yes. First of all, at the outset, I would like to thank Dulika ma'am, Dr. Sangeeta ma'am, and Pradeep sir, our professor and the former head of the Department of Pediatrics, for giving us this opportunity. The case that we are going to present today is extremely interesting case. What initially appeared to be as a relatively straightforward febrile illness later turned gradually evolved into a diagnostic challenge with unexpected complications along the way. And as we managed the case, we had several learning points. Without further delay, I would request, with this background, my senior resident, Dr. Neha, to begin the presentation. Dr. Neha, are you there?
Yeah.
Can you start sharing your presentation?
Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. Am I audible?
Yes, Neha, you are audible.
Okay. So, is my screen visible to everyone?
Yes, it's visible. I think you can
Yes, it's
start
visible.
now.
Okay. So, good afternoon, everyone. Respected seniors. Today, I, Dr. Neha Yadav from Sadajam Hospital, will be presenting a case with uncommon manifestations. So, I'm starting. So, the outline of the presentation includes history and examination, course, differentials, final diagnosis, treatment and follow-up, and review of literature. Case details. So I am presenting a case of Master P, 11-year-old boy, resident of Badarpur, Delhi. The informant was mother and she is a reliable source of information. Date of admission was 9th of September 2025. Date of discharge was 11th October and duration of stay in the hospital was 38 days. Chief complaints. The child presented with fever and pain abdomen for 2 months, vomiting for the last 2 days, and non-passage of stools for the last 2 days. History of presenting complaints. The child had fever, which was low grade, intermittent, with no diurnal variation. It was associated with reduced appetite and weight loss, and relieved by some over-the-counter antipyretics. There was no history of any rash. The child also developed pain abdomen, which was initially localized to central and right upper abdomen and dull aching, intermittent in nature, non-colicky. But later, over the last 2 days, the child had increased intensity, which was relieved with bending forward and increased after meals. And he was unable to carry out his daily activities due to the pain. Next, the child presented with vomiting, which was present for the last 2 days. The child had 2 to 3 episodes of vomiting, which contained undigested food, non-projectile vomiting, and which was also non-bilious in nature. He also complained of non-passage of stools, which was associated with increasing abdominal distension, but he was able to pass play tests. With these complaints, he presented in the ER. Negative history. There was no history of any yellowish discoloration of eyes or urine. There was no cough, night sweats, evening rise of temperature. No history of any bony pains, progressive pallor, or easy bruisability. No history of any altered bowel habits or blood in stool in the past. No history of burning micturition, increased frequency of micturition, or urgency of flank pain. There was no history of any animal contact or consumption of unpasteurized milk or joint pain or rash. There is no recent history of travel, no history of trauma to the abdomen, fatty stools, or foul smelling stools. Treatment history. The child over the past 2 months had taken some OPD basis management from local practitioners. There was no documented admission and there were no past records available. He had some over the counter medications for fever and abdominal pain. Past history. There was no history of similar illness in the past. There was no history of previous hospital admissions or surgeries. Antenatal, birth, and postnatal period was uneventful. The child was developmentally well with age-appropriate milestones, was studying in 6th standard with average scholastic performance. Immunization history was as per national immunization schedule, and the last immunization was at 10 years of age. This is the family pedigree chart of the family. There was no history of any similar illness in the family, but the father died of CNS tuberculosis 6 years ago. Actually, the child had 7 days of hospital stay with acute worsening of sensorium and seizures, and he was intubated within day 2, and he died within 7 days. There was no microbiological evidence or documents available, but verbally, the mother was told that the death was possibly due to tuberculosis. Dietary history. So the expected intake of the child was 2000 to 2020, 2200 kilocalories, but it was during the illness period 1250, which came out to be 40-degree deficient in calories, and intake of protein of 20 grams, which came out to be 50% deficient in proteins. Socioeconomic history. The child belonged to upper lower class. Could not be opened. Examination. The child on a general physical examination looked cachectic. The temperature documented in the ER on presentation was 101 degree Fahrenheit, measured in the axilla. Pulse rate was 108 beats per minute, which was good in volume, character, regular, no radial or radiofemoral delay. Respiratory rate was 24 breaths per minute. The capillary refill time was normal. Blood pressure recorded was 108 by 68 millimeters of mercury, measured in the right arm supine, lying in the 50th or 90th centile. The saturation was 98% in room air, and there was no signs of any dehydration. Anthropometry. The weight of the child at admission was 24 kgs. Height, which lied between -1 to -2 standard deviation. Height was 137 centimeters. BMI was 12.8, which lied between -2 to -3 standard deviation. And there was also a significant weight loss, which was documented to be 17% over the last 8 months. The child lied under thinness. General physical examination, there was no pallor, icterus, pedal edema, or clubbing, but there was significant bilateral cervical lymphadenopathy present in the child. Level 1, 2, 3, and 4 and 5 were all involved. There were discrete lymph nodes which were mobile on palpation, non-tender. Largest one measurings were 2 into 2 centimeter in size. The overlying skin was normal. It was not adhered with the underlying tissue. There was no discharging sinus and no lymphadenopathy at any other sites of the body. The eyes and rest of the general physical examination was normal. Per abdomen examination, inspection, the child had mildly distended abdomen. Umbilicus was central and flat. There was no scars or dilated veins overlying. On palpation, the child had guarding present, no rigidity, and there was some epigastric tenderness present. There was no palpable mass or organomegaly. On percussion, there was no shifting dullness or fluid thrill, and liver span came out to be 10 centimeter, which was normal. Auscultation, there was bowel sounds were present. The rest of the systemic examination came out to be normal. Respiratory rate was normal, bilateral symmetrical chest, trachea midline, and bilateral air entry was equal. The cardiovascular and CNS examination was normal at the time of presentation. So, summary of our case, an 11-year-old boy presented with low-grade intermittent fever for the last 2 months, abdominal pain for the last 2 months associated with anorexia, noticeable weight loss, and acute worsening of pain, vomiting, and non-passage of stools for the last 2 days. Examination revealed thinness, bilateral cervical lymphadenopathy, abdominal distension with guarding and mild epigastric tenderness.
So just a second, Dr. Neha. Any questions from the audience at this point of time? So right now we know we have an 11-year-old boy who has presented with low-grade intermittent fever for 2 months. There is abdominal pain along with significant weight loss. and he has presented with acute worsening of pain, vomiting, and non-passage of stools. So any questions at this point of time? Okay. Before we go ahead, I would just like to mention that the link for the pre-test questionnaire has been shared in the chat box. You all can attempt the same. Okay, we will proceed ahead. Okay, Dr. Neha, you can proceed.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am. So moving forward, with with these possibilities, we came up with these differentials. First was infectious causes, the number one being disseminated tuberculosis involving the abdomen and lymph node. Second was malignancy lymphoma. In rheumatological, we had sarcoidosis, and least was acute and chronic pancreatitis. So one by one, so the first differential was disseminated tuberculosis. The points in favor were the child had chronic fever of last 2 months, pain abdomen, there was anorexia and weight loss, socioeconomic status was poor, and there was overcrowding present at home. Points against was there was no significant contact history, no cough, and no evening rise of temperature. In infectious cause, we also considered enteric fever, but there was fever with abdominal signs was present and anorexia was present. But points against was there was low-grade fever, long duration of illness, and there was significant bilateral cervical lymphadenopathy present. Third, we kept lymphoma. There was presence of B-grade signs, fever, weight loss, and painless lymphadenopathy, cervical nodes. But against was there was no lymphadenopathy at other sites and no night sweats. Fourth was HIV. Points in favor were fever, cervical lymphadenopathy, fatigue, weight loss, anorexia, and history of CNS tuberculosis in the father. Points against were there was acute worsening with no history of recurrent infections, recurrent hospitalization, diarrhea, or stunting. Fifth was sarcoidosis, which was a rare case, but there were points in favor were there was fever spikes, lymphadenopathy, and abdominal symptoms, but there was no arthralgia, rash, ocular symptoms, no other lymphadenopathy or cough. In last was our pancreatitis. The child had consistent pain, abdomen, and last 2 days the child had a relief in the pain with forward bending. But points against were there was cervical lymphadenopathy, a significant history of fever, and no non-radiating pain, no steatorrhea. So with these differentials, we carried forward with our investigations. So the initial investigation in the emergency room revealed X-ray PA view of this child, which showed significant bilateral hilar prominence and paratracheal lymph nodes. We also got an X-ray abdomen erect. The child came with acute abdominal signs, which was suggestive of fecal loading. A USG was done in the ER itself, which revealed raised periportal echogenicity and hepatomegaly. Multiple peripancreatic lymph nodes were seen in the ultrasound. Query infective etiology was kept. Now, the hospital course in the ward from day 1 to day 3. So the initial investigations of the child on the day of admission revealed hemoglobin of 12.5, TLC count of 6,000, platelet 2.9 lakh, creatinine 0.8, urea 31, sodium 135, and potassium 4.4. With this, the child was initially vitally stable. IV fluids were started, and an antibiotic cover was also started. The child was planned for induced sputum, which came out to be negative for AFB and CBNAT. And because of the acute abdominal signs, a mileage lipase on day 1 was sent, which came out to be 518 and 1030. So workup was planned for pancreatitis. On day 3, the child developed acute drop in hemoglobin with an acute rise in urea of 194 and creatinine of 7. Hemoglobin dropped from 12 to 5, counts were 12,000, and platelet dropped from 2.9 lakh to 46,000. With this acute drop in hemoglobin and rise in urea creat, a nephrology opinion was taken, and child was worked up in terms of thrombotic microangiopathies because there was evidence of microangiopathic hemolytic anemia. So further workup was sent. LDH came out to be 1,266. A PS was done for this child, which revealed 8.1% schistocytes and echinocytes. On day 4 onwards, the child was started for hemodialysis. One cycle was done, and the child later developed acute worsening in sensorium and developed shock. He was shifted to PICU. Some more investigations done on day 3 revealed the C3 and C4 levels. C3 was mildly reduced for the range. It came out to be 86, and C4 was within normal limits. It could tell us about an alteration in the alternate complement pathway. We also did a factor H antibody on the day 3 itself, which came out to be negative. Surprisingly, the day 3 level amylase lipase came out to be in the reducing trend. LDH was raised. FNAC was done on day 2 itself when the child was stable. It was done from the right level 4 cervical lymph node, but later on report collection, the sample was inconclusive. ESR was 56 millimeters of mercury. HIV was negative. MON2 was more than 15 mm for this child. Reading was done after 48 hours. So now on day 3 onwards, the child was shifted to PICU. There, the child was intubated in view of poor sensorium and shock. Antibiotics were upgraded empirically, and the child was started on peritoneal dialysis, and inotropes were also started. The lab investigations revealed on day 6 and day 10, we see a falling trend initially, and then the child went into hematological remission with ongoing PDs. So that after and hemodialysis, the hemoglobin improved uh, from falling down till 6 gram per deciliter to 9.8. Platelets gradually improved to a trend till 2 lakh, and urea and creatinine also stabilized with ongoing peritoneal dialysis. So when the hemodynamic condition improved of the child, the inotropes were tapered off and the child was extubated on day 9. And he was later shifted to ward on day 13. So amylase lipase were also in serially decreasing trend, and coagulation profile serially done revealed no coagulopathy. So clinically, the child had improving AKI. Pancreatitis was resolving trend. The child also underwent 2 to 3 more sessions of hemodialysis till the creatinine stabilized, but there was persistent fever spikes. So the further workup was done in the ward, and a CCT was planned, and an excisional biopsy of cervical lymph node was also planned because our earlier FNAC was inconclusive. Also, fever workup was done initially as a child presented with high-grade fever. So typhi.IgM Vidal art was negative, and culture report also serially sent 48 hours apart was also negative. So till day 13, the child had a stable platelet level with hemoglobin level, and urea creat had stabilized to 12 urea and 0.4 creatinine. So this is the summary of the investigations. So we see that an acute drop in hemoglobin and platelet was found on day 3 of the admission, with gradual improvement serially over the last 5 to 6 days. And an acute rise in urea and creatinine was seen on day 3, with gradual, slowly the trend improved over last 10 days. So further workup was planned from our ward. So at the start of week 3, the child's CCT, chest and neck was done, which revealed multiple enlarged, heterogeneously enhancing necrotic mediastinal and cervical lymph nodes in lower cervical, posterior triangle, bilateral upper lower paratracheal, prevascular, subcarinal, para-aortic, and subaortic and hilar areas, with some of them showing conglomeration and calcification. Largest was 3.2 into 1.7 centimeters in size. There was also noted small lung nodules in the left upper lobe and superior segment of the left lower lobe. And along with CCT chest, CCT abdomen was also done, which showed multiple and large heterogeneously enhanced necrotic lymph nodes in the mesenteric retroperitoneal area, periportal area, left external iliac, and again, some of them showed conglomeration and calcification. The terminal ileum and IC junction was normal. The spleen was enlarged in size, liver was enlarged in size, spleen was normal. The pancreas is heterogeneously enhanced. Peripancreatic lymph nodes were causing compression of the neck of the pancreas. There was one, so I'll just show you. So these are the films we got from the radiology department. So CCT axial view of the abdomen. So my pointer red arrow shows here multiple enlarged lymph nodes here. This is the boundary of the pancreas, as you can see. This is the tail part, body part, and head and neck area. And this is also an conglomeration of lymph nodes. So we can't see the margins clearly. These are conglomerated lymph nodes, and these are just posterior to the neck of the pancreas. Next image is also of CCT abdomen. Now, this is a, if I can zoom. So this is a hypertenating lesion in the head of the pancreas, measuring 7 mm into 1 centimeter. So there was one hypodense lesion in the pancreas, which was likely reported to be a tuberculoma. Second was a lymph node compressing the neck of the pancreas. Now CCT axial view of the chest, we see hilar lymph nodes here, multiple hilar lymph nodes, multiple subcarinal lymph nodes present here. So we went ahead next day with our with our excisional biopsy with the left cervical lymph node. So the histopath report was this from the pathology department. So this was a low power view of the histopath report. It showed widespread caseous necrosis here, where the star is marked, and it showed multiple coalescing granulomas, granuloma 1, 2, and 3. There was granulomas with rimming of the granuloma with lymphocytes. In high power view, we switch over to the second image. Here we can also appreciate this granuloma and rimming with lymphocytes and these slipper-shaped epithelioid cells, which are characteristics in the tuberculosis, and Langerhans giant cell also is also seen here. And the AFB was positive in this case with histopath report, and CBNAT came out to be tuberculosis detected, rifampicin sensitive in this case. Later, we collected the MGIT report, which was culture negative. So the final diagnosis in our case was drug sensitive disseminated tuberculosis involving the pulmonary area, lymph node, and abdomen, leading to acute pancreatitis and pancreatitis-induced thrombotic microangiopathy. On further management and followed up, the child was started on 4-drug ATD in the week 3 itself. Isoniazid at 10 mg per kg, rifampicin at 15 mg per kg, pyrazinamide at 35 mg per kg, and ethambutol at 20 mg per kg. After discharge, the child was followed at 1 month of starting ATT. He was afebrile, asymptomatic, with no fever spikes and no pain abdomen. Urea creatinine amylase lipase was also done at this point, which came out to be normal. And the last follow-up visit was in the first week of May, and the weight of the child was 35 kg, which had increased from 24 kg previously. So 10 kg weight gain was present. So this was all about the case. Now literature review.
Just a second, Dr. Neha. We can take up questions now, if there are any. Dr. Alok had some queries with regard to differentials.
Hello. Dr. Neha, hello.
Yes, yes, sir.
In this child, when the ATT was started, at the time of ICU, when the child was on ICU, or when the child you were detected in the oxygen biopsy, in the CBNet, the TB was detected. After that, ATT was started, or
Sir,
when the
the
child was
ATT
in
was started when the CT report was collected. So on week 3 it was started, sir, because we had no microbiological evidence in the starting period, and he acutely worsened on day 3 onwards with a very he became very hemodynamically unstable. So it was very unlike TB at that point. We had initially kept the possibility for TB, but during the events, when he stabilized, then we started when the CT was done, sir. And it showed conglomerated widespread lymphadenopathy and necrotic lymph nodes. Then we started the CT. And second day only we did the excisional biopsy, but the report was collected within 48 hours. So at the time, ATT was already started.
and any culture report of this excisional biopsy?
So yes, sir,
Yeah.
the culture was negative. Yes, sir. MJIT we sent.
You send them. Okay.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Any other questions from the audience? So Dr. Satish wants to know if a chest X-ray was taken in the course of investigation. They had already shown the X-ray during the
Yes.
presentation. They were parahilar prominences. So there was a paratracheal lymphadenopathy as well as bilateral hilar prominence. So this was shared during the presentation. I will request the audience to please attempt the pretest questionnaire as well. Any other
Thank you.
questions?
Thank you for this response here.
Okay, so we'll now proceed with the literature review. Dr. Neha, you may please proceed.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. So now going forward with the literature review. So the burden of tuberculosis, approximately 7 lakh children ranging from till 14 years were notified with tuberculosis under WHO Global Tuberculosis Report in the 2023. Nearly a third of children with TB globally are from India. Estimated detection gap was about 56%, and children aged 0 to 14 years, that is 35% of our country's population, contributed approximately to 10% of the caseload. So when do we suspect abdominal and GI tuberculosis? So abdominal TB can present variably with variable signs and symptoms. It can include the intestine involvement, nodal involvement, peritoneal involvement, or the visceral involvement. Common symptoms are usually abdominal pain, fever, distension, weight loss, and anorexia, which are usually non-specific. On examination, we can have doughy abdomen, ascites, hepatosplenomegaly if there is a visceral involvement, omental mass, or visible peristalsis. So, isolated recurrent or chronic pain without any other symptom is usually not due to tuberculosis. Clinical features, as we discussed, there are overlapping clinical features in abdominal tuberculosis, but there are some pointers to where the lesion might be. Example, in peritoneal TB, we can have ascites, which is there. Hepatomegaly, anorexia, and abdominal pain, fever can also be present. In intestinal TB, we can have diarrhea or constipation. Enlarged nodes can also cause gastrointestinal obstruction, invisible peristalsis. We can also have shallow ulcers, and we know that the most common site involved is the IC junction. And in visceral TB, that is, we have involvement of the liver, space-occupying lesions in the spleen or pancreas. Least likely the pancreas. We can have jaundice if there is any involvement of the bile duct or cholestatic roots, or weight loss, hepatomegaly, splenomegaly, hepatic abscess, or any palpable abdominal lump. So this is the diagnostic algorithm that I have taken from the ICMR and NTEP guidelines. So if you come up with a patient with abdominal TB, so what is the diagnostic algorithm? So first we look for peripheral nodes, get a chest X-ray and abdominal USG done. So first, if the USG is completely normal, so you need to rule out other causes for this and work up for them. If the ultrasound is suggestive of tuberculosis, we look at the X-ray, and X-ray is abnormal, then we also plan the child for sputum, induced sputum, or gastric aspirates in cases of pediatrics, and we send them for AFP, CBNAT, and culture. So if the patient came out to be positive, then we straight away start with treatment. If he came out to be negative, then we should consider for USG guided FNAC if there are nodes in the abdomen, or CECT guided FNAC. So if there are peripheral nodes are present, FNAC is done from them. Most accessible is cervical lymph nodes. If it is present, then we send them for smear cytopathology report, AFP, CBNAT, and TB culture. If positive, then we straight away start the treatment. If negative, then we look for nodes in the abdomen. If they are positive, then we take the FNAC from there, USG guided FNAC. If there are no peripheral node, then X-ray is completely normal. Then we have to focus on our abdominal findings. Example, if there are ascites present, then we send the ascitic fluid aspiration. So we send for cytology, protein, sugar. There can be cytologically there can be cells in thousands from 1500 to 4 to 5000, and mostly are lymphocytic predominant. Protein is usually increased in them, more than 3 gram per deciliter, and SAG is usually less than 1.1, suggesting exudative ascites. Lymphadenopathy. So if and also with this we send for CBNAT and TB culture and AFP smear, and if this is positive, we start treatment. We should know that abdominal samples are usually low yield in tuberculosis. And then if we have mesenteric or abdominal lymphadenopathy or any mass, then we send them for USG guided or CT guided FNAC. And again, we send all the samples. And if at any point it comes out to be positive, we start treatment. In cases of ileocecal junction thickening or ileocecal tuberculosis, shallow ulcers or obstruction or stricture there, we go for CECT abdomen or CT enterography if needed. Okay, so this is a tabular presentation of all the imaging that we can plan in a case of abdominal tuberculosis. So the best is tissue diagnosis only, as it is the most reliable. X-ray is not a very good diagnostic tool in abdominal tuberculosis. Our first line is always ultrasonography, and if needed, contrast enhanced CT. So initial modality of choice, it can. Hello, pardon. Okay.
Yes, Dr. Neha, you can continue.
Okay. So initial ultrasound and CT can reveal significant lymphadenopathy, more than 1 centimeter in size. It can be conglomerated or not, showing necrosis. Usually in a positive case, it will show necrosis. Omental thickening can be seen, bowel wall thickening, concentric thickening, and ascites can be appreciated in usually our ultrasonography only. Ileocecal area is the most commonly involved area. We should always look up for it. And if these tests are non-conclusive and there is a strong suspicion, and we are suspecting the intestinal wall involvement, we also sometimes go ahead with CT enterography. There you can see concentric bowel wall thickening and uniformly done. Contracted and pulled up cecum. Ileocecal angle is usually distorted and often obtuse, and short strictures of less than 3 centimeters. And peritoneoscopy is also sometimes needed in cases of peritoneal tuberculosis. It can have hyperemic peritoneum with ascites with miliary small nodules in the peritoneum, overlying the peritoneum. There can be multiple adhesions and thickened peritoneum. So these are all the diagnostic modalities that we can use to diagnose our abdominal tuberculosis. So now our case with a rare presentation of pancreatic tuberculosis. So pancreas is usually resistant to TB and not very commonly reported. Why so? Because the pancreas is in a hidden location in the retroperitoneum. And pancreatic enzymes are proteases, lipases, usually inhibit a Mycobacterium tuberculosis growth. And the pancreas is having a rich blood flow and oxygenation, which is very unfavorable for the bacilli to survive. So TB here actually means there is a very high bacillary load, widespread TB dissemination, or there could be immunosuppression, or there can be a very strong spread from nearby sites. The spread of tuberculosis to pancreas, it can either go from a miliary hematogenous spread, a lymphatic spread through lymph nodes, or direct spread from a contiguous adjacent organ involvement. Three patterns are seen as part of disseminated miliary TB, or involvement of pancreas secondary to retroperitoneal lymph nodes, or as an isolated pancreatic TB, which is very rarely seen. In general, pancreatic tuberculosis is a part of disseminated miliary TB, but rarely can present as a primary manifestation. Epidemiology. So, pancreatic tuberculosis is very rare, even in regions with high prevalence of tuberculosis like India, with an incidence reported to be 4 to 5% cases among cases with abdominal TB. So, these data are usually extrapolated from case series basis and case reports and case series basis. There has been no formal percentage that we can comment on. So a very large study was done in India, which reviewed articles from 1999 to 2004, which detected about 8.3% cases of pancreatic TB. Out of all the 384 cases of abdominal TB, they detected 32. So common age group reported was 20 to 45 years of age, and data in children is usually limited to case reports and small case series only. So clinical presentation. Again, like in abdominal TB, the signs and symptoms can be very non-specific, and majorly the child is asymptomatic. So our non-specific symptoms could be abdominal pain, anorexia, weight loss, vomiting, fever, and night sweats. And mostly, as we have seen, most commonly it involves young adults. It can present at epigastric palpable mass, and it usually we see in young adults they are usually presenting in the surgery department with mass, and they are worked up in cases of pancreatic malignancy. And in laparotomy, after exploratory laparotomy, they find out that retrospectively that the patient had pancreatic TB. So the pathophysiology behind it, usually pancreatic involvement with our caseating granuloma form in the tuberculosis. It can coalesce to form mass-like lesions and cause obstruction and external compression. So if that granuloma and pseudotumor that is formed, that is causing obstruction or compression of the pancreatic duct, it can impair enzymatic drainage and lead to pancreatitis, which is also a very rare manifestation. And pancreatitis is usually mild. Second, it can cause compression of the common bile duct and cause obstructive jaundice-like signs and symptoms. And sometimes, very rarely, mostly seen in adults, if it is causing obstruction and external compression of the duodenum, it can lead to gastric outlet obstruction signs and symptoms also. So, other very rare complications include portal hypertension. Suppose there is a um, obstruction to the splenic artery with the increased enhanced periportal or splenic nodes, lymph nodes around the splenic artery, diabetes mellitus, abscess formation, or recurrent acute pancreatitis. So this is a journal, Pancreatic Tuberculosis, a systematic review done by Nicola Panic et al. So what they did was it was a systematic review. It included patients all over the world. 50% were from Asia, and they included 116 studies in which there were 166 patients of pancreatic tuberculosis. So they wanted to study all the symptoms it could present with, what is the diagnosis that could be used. So this was the more largest study that we could find, and it was also worldwide. The patients were from all over the world. So they saw that, and the patients were children along with adults. It is not a single-handedly pediatric study. So they saw that pancreatic mass was seen in most common, the head was involved with 79% involvement. Abdominal pain was 74, and weight loss and fever was also present. And there was some 31% patients revealed elevated lipase and amylase. So the investigation that we can plan for a suspected case of pancreatic TB, ultrasound abdomen and CECT, and or if needed MRI or MRCP. So commonly what the presentation could entail was, so like here we can see a hypoattenuated focal lesion in the head of the pancreas, or we can have multiple large periportal lymphadenopathy here. So most commonly head is involved, focal pancreatic mass, diffuse pancreatic enlargement or bulky pancreas, hypodense or necrotic lesions in the pancreas, cystic or pseudocystic like appearance, peripancreatic or periportal lymphadenopathy, or ascites or bowel wall thickening. So these can all be the variable presentation. Now pancreatic TB causing pancreatitis. So we all know that so the head and neck is usually from the primary lymph node, that is gastroduodenal, and body and tail is from the splenic duodenal lymph nodes, and they all drain into the celiac and superior mesenteric nodes into the thoracic duct. So the mechanism of a pancreatic TB leading to pancreatitis, there can be external ductal compression or inflammatory edema due to tuberculoma or ischemia of the pancreas due to lymph node pressure or compression. So it can have amylase lipase normal or mildly elevated. So we see pancreatitis is usually very self-limiting and mild in nature, and severe necrotizing pancreatitis is uncommon in TB patients. Diagnosis. So our first modality is endoscopic ultrasound, guided FNEC or core biopsy. So that can be done from pancreatic lesion or peripancreatic lymph node. We should send them for histopathology report and microbiology. That is common to all the histopath reports of tuberculosis. And microbiologically, AFV smear, CBNAT, gene expert, and culture should always be sent in all the cases. Now, a small brief discussion on thrombotic microangiopathy, because our child was complicated with this. So it is a rare multi-system disease unifying by a common pathology, that is massive occlusion of small vessels, arterioles, and capillaries by platelet-rich and fibrin thrombi. So we have all these causes like Shiga toxin or complement dysregulation or neuraminidase by Streptococcus pneumoniae or drugs or infection, which can lead to endothelial injury and platelet activation and aggregation, leading to either stenosis of our arterioles and capillaries, causing mechanical stress and breakage of our trauma to the RBC, leading to schistocytes and echinocytes, shown in this PS. It can lead to thrombosis and resulting in consumptive thrombocytopenia and ischemia to our vital organs in the microvasculature, like most commonly involving the kidney, brain, and GIT. So thrombotic microangiopathy is an umbrella term including all these entities. So TTP includes ADAMTS13 deficiency, HELP syndrome, and hemolytic uremic syndrome. So what in our case, what happened was an HUS secondary to a primary disease, that is pancreatitis. These all diseases and etiologies form a common feature of endothelial injury and platelet thrombosis and affecting the microcirculation of several organs. So hemolytic uremic syndrome, a subclassification of TMA only. So it consists of a triad of microangiopathic hemolytic anemia, which includes anemia, hemoglobin of less than 10, hematocrit of less than 30, fragmented RBC on PS, that is schistocyte more than 2%, elevated LDH level more than 450 international unit per liter, or undetectable haptoglobin level. Second, thrombocytopenia less than 1.5 lakh, and AKI. And now pancreatitis and TMA. So so we can see that there is complement system dysregulation in pancreatitis, microthrombi formation that is leading to damage to the endothelial lining, platelet aggregation, and microthrombi, and leading to the pathophysiology of TMA. And there are some studies also suggest that there is von Willebrand factor modification, which further exacerbates our TMA. So the clinical course is usually pancreatitis usually precedes the onset of HUS by a few days, that most of the papers suggest 3 to 5 days, with severe inflammatory state triggering the hematological and renal complications. So, a summary of etiopathogenesis in our particular case. So, there was disseminated tuberculosis in our patient, which led to pancreatic involvement, pancreatic TB, and peripancreatic ductal obstruction, leading to pancreatitis, which led to our thrombotic microangiopathy. A second possibility was also kept that a disseminated tuberculosis directly affecting causing thrombotic microangiopathy, because tuberculosis is also a chronic inflammatory state and it could lead to complement dysregulation. But there is very less data on this type of pathway, and we had very less case reports to support this. So this was our possible etiopathogenesis that was kept. So these three are the journals that we had referred from. Pediatric patients, these all three were pediatric patients which had acute pancreatitis, which lead to thrombotic microangiopathy and AKI. So the cause for pancreatitis was different in all of them. The first kid had gallstone obstruction leading to pancreatitis leading to TMA. And the second kid had genetic causes, and third had idiopathic pancreatitis. All of them proved how pancreatitis is leading up to thrombotic microangiopathy. This is another systematic review. It included 21 total patients. So they tried to show that there were short interval between pancreatitis and thrombotic microangiopathy, that is 3 days. Pancreatitis always preceded them, and it raised the hypothesis that the inflammatory consequence of pancreatitis has a direct impact on pathogenesis of TMA. So this was that. Lastly, we could find only one case report regarding a direct causal link between tuberculosis and TMA. So, and it was not very, we could not find literature review for this, that TB can directly cause it. This paper had regarded some mechanism that they had proposed, but there was no backing. So they said that tuberculosis is also a chronic inflammatory state. It can cause direct endothelial injury, and there are cases with deficiency of ADAMTS13 and procoagulant pathways. But this is less likely. So going on to treatment. So pancreatic TB is clubbed under abdominal tuberculosis only. So we follow the same guidelines for abdominal TB. There is no different guidelines, same as that of extrapulmonary tuberculosis in abdominal cases. Patients respond well to conventional ATT, that is 2 months of intensive phase of HRZE and 4 months of HRE. Pyridoxine supplementation is given 10 mg per day. Nutritional management is given to this child, and sometimes if the pancreatic TB is leading up to intestinal or biliary obstruction, then endoscopic or surgical intervention might be needed. Monitoring of these cases. So assessment of response to treatment, clinical follow-up every month during the treatment, followed by every 3 months, and every 6 months till 2 years after completion of treatment. Radiological USG at the end of treatment or if worsening or non-response. Microbiological if worsening or non-response to treatment. Pointers toward drug-resistant TB. There is non-response to treatment or worsening or deterioration of constitutional symptoms after initial improvement, or we need to rule out Crohn's disease or IBD in these patients. So take-home messages. Abdominal TB has diverse and non-specific symptomology. Pancreatic TB is usually difficult to diagnose, requiring a high index of clinical suspicion. Pancreatic TB can uncommonly present as pancreatitis also. Every child presenting with anemia, the triad of anemia, thrombocytopenia, and AKI warrants detailed workup for HUS. In endemic regions, TB should remain an important differential and multisystem unexplained presentations also. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Neha, and thanks, Dr. Pameli. This was indeed a very well worked up case, and we had a lot of things to learn from this case. I will now request Dr. Alok to summarize the case for the audience once.
Any questions?
Any questions from the audience? There is one question with regard to EBUS, but the team had already made a diagnosis from a peripheral lymph node. So I don't think we had to go for an invasive thing for a diagnosis to be. It was the diagnosis was made through a peripheral lymph node. through
Hello,
excisional biopsy.
hello, hello, Dr. Dulika, Dr. Kamal here.
Yes, Dr. Kamal.
I think a very nicely presented case. She presented a very nice algorithm about how to investigate. But I think large portion of our audience will not be getting pancreatitis in TB so commonly. So what need to understand is how to investigate such patients. So she showed a lot of options that you have, right from a CT scan to a CT enterogram to an ultrasound to an X-ray. But if you boiled it down to something very, very easy to understand thing is that even when you have abdominal TB, make all out effort to look at all other sites. You may get a microbiological evidence from other easily accessible sites. For example, a GA may be able to give you a diagnosis rather than putting a needle or somewhere into this. And again, abdominal TB can be nodal type, visceral type, or luminal type. So depending on that, you should choose your investigations judiciously. Otherwise, yes, whether it was a primarily pancreatic involvement because of TB or a complication or a which led to it, it's more of an academic exercise, and the treatment will more or less remain the same. Nicely worked up case. Thank you.
No, it's really very interesting, and I'm impressed because I've never seen pancreatic TB in my career till date. And this is in fact, the traditional, academics regarding tuberculosis is that pancreas is one of the sites where TB is very uncommon and one of the sites resistant to tuberculosis. So to pick up TB from pancreas, because they were, and the other thing which you very rightly said, one should look for always the easily accessible sites. As in this case, the cervical lymph nodes are there, so there is no need of going towards EBUS. There was this question which Dr. Dhulika has already answered. So easily accessible sites, and get a chest X-ray even if it's an abdominal presentation, because and also with such kind of a chest X-ray where there is paratracheal lymphadenopathy and hilar lymphadenopathy, even getting the microbiological confirmation through the respiratory specimen. So all these things are very important because you need to arrive at, we are trying to arrive at the microbiological diagnosis. But I must compliment Dr. Pradeep Debdata. I'm sure he is already logged in. So Dr. Pradeep, I'm really congratulate your team for such an excellent presentation. I mean, we are thoroughly impressed by your team. And if you're there, we'd like to